everyone. Welcome to the show and our own personal leather fest.
Leather. Shannon in the leather.
Oh my God. Help me. Help me. Today on the show, we are going to talk about
leather.
Leather pants action flicks, basically, in a more general way, but I'm going to get into talking about some of the films as well. But if you didn't know, there was a leather pants action time. It was when we were doing Matrix.
It was a political statement.
And we were doing Blade, and we were doing Underworld, and it's the turn of the century, and leather became this, well, we already knew it from the 60s and 70s, but leather became this symbol of power.
Yes. I found an article called Leather as Power in Turn of Millennium Genre Film. I mean, basically what Shannon just said. It's an article by Mary Beth McAndrews, came out in 2019. She says, slick, shiny black leather is sexy. It's sleek, it's tight, and it carries a connotation of power. The ethos of leather, if you will, was utilized by genre films around the turn of the millennium to cater to a certain cyberpunk aesthetic. But more than aesthetics, these films also tapped into the historical use of leather in queer and kink communities to subvert hegemonic ideals of masculinity and sexuality. Films such as The Matrix, Blade, and Underworld, which will be the three we're talking about today, well, all horror or sci-fi action movies dress their protagonists in leather to create symbols of rebellion against seemingly unstoppable regimes. This was also called a techno-leather time, and all of the music in all three of these films is techno.
Yeah.
So she goes on to talk about how leather dominated this era of genre filmmaking, and the iconic material actually emerged as a kink subculture after World War II. So gay men met each other after being drafted into the war, and when they returned home, they formed gay motorcycle gangs that incorporated leather and BDSM practices. Some folks would know that as leather daddies. The leather community eventually began to include lesbians and trans people in the 1980s. So there's always been, and we see this in Hellraiser as well, which is, we know that's 80s, but leather is always incorporated. So she goes on to then say, with leather's history in mind, it may seem silly to group The Matrix, Blade, and Underworld together, particularly as narratives that speak to queer and kink communities. They're all borderline ridiculous films that have all gained cult followings. But they also utilize leather paired with a character's gender, race, sexuality, beliefs, or a combination of the four to make their central protagonists into images of revolutionary power. And their release dates are all a key factor in the use of leather. These all were released around the turn of the millennium, as Shannon was saying. And this was a time of massive change and uncertainty. We all thought that the clock was going to strike at midnight and we were going to lose all of our tech. And tech was rapidly changing from 1999 to the year 2000. It marked the election of George W. Bush as president of the United States, and the specter of the AIDS crisis still loomed over America. It was a tumultuous time marked by conservatism and an almost radical patriotism that wanted to reinforce stereotypical gender norms. Each of these films reflects a rejection of those norms as the protagonists fight to topple quasi-fascist regimes that dominate their respective worlds. So in all of that, basically doing what's right, anti-establishment.
She's dropping the mic. Another one of the bases for all of this too is all of the goth.
Yes.
The gothic movement, which is based also in gothic horror.
Yes.
Which is some of our favorite movies. I mean,
and also has a lot of queer underpinnings and identity in there too.
Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Lots of gays.
Goth film.
Lots of gay goths.
The Crow.
Gay goth film. Just kidding. No.
It's coming out, there's another one coming out, and the goth, in that Hellraiser. Goth.
Well, and also like they're misunderstood trying to do the right thing, but pinned as these rebels without a cause.
Yeah, The Cell, 2000, goth. There's just so many of those. Near Dark, one of my faves. 87, like goth. These are all, Blade, definitely. The blood rave scene at the beginning.
Oh my
That's
gosh.
a very gothic moment. very goth moment. The Craft, The Matrix, like all of these movies, Edward Scissorhands, like all of this kind of like goth culture, The Nightmare Before Christmas. all
Anything
of
Tim
these.
Burton's done.
Yeah, exactly. For real.
Except Big Fish, probably. Yeah.
Yeah, he's had some outliers. A lot of this is based in goth culture, in gothic horror. And, you know, if you want to be angsty, watch these movies kind of thing. But I did want to talk about these franchises a little bit just from a fun place, right? And maybe you can also chime in later about like how that relates to what the article that you're talking about.
Sure.
Because as we just kind of have a fun time talking about the franchises, you know, it's going to relate to those things. But first, we are going to do a little something we like to call
Leather facts with leather.
Leather Tuscadero.
I just wanted to say leather about leather.
You've been practicing all day.
Leather facts with leather. That would make me leather. That makes no sense.
Leather Tuscadero.
Leather facts with Kath.
Okay.
Number 1, in the movie Blade, what is the name that Deacon Frost is trying to decipher? Number 2, in the Underworld series, the vampires used blank against the Lycans. It's specific, though.
I'm sure. That's why I won't get it. Okay, go ahead.
Number 3, you get options.
Oh.
The movie Matrix Resurrections began production in San Francisco in February 2020. Under what code name? Was it Project Sweetheart, Project Ice Cream, or Project Cable Car?
Okay.
Number 4, what is Blade's birth name? And then number 5, the unnamed city you see in the Matrix is actually what?
What? Why? At the end of the show, we will get answers to those. I will guess, of course, or I won't. And then we'll learn things. Let's start with the Matrix because I think it really sort of fits with what you were talking about technology, right? And being taken over in the sort of 2000 sphere, the Y2K fears that we had. Mm-hmm. For those of you who haven't watched The Matrix, where have you been? What are you doing? Why are you living under a rock?
It had been a while since I had watched the first one.
There's 4 of them. 1999 they start, and as you guys probably know, 3 years ago they came out with another one, but that was like almost 20 years, something like 18 years after they did the 1999, 2003, 2021. They kind of hopped around a bit or whatever. But the 1999 movie, it's really interesting because I remember where I was and how I felt when I came out of the movie theater with this movie. There are not that many movies that I have that kind of sense memory to, I'll be honest with you. I came out of this movie feeling like I could fist fight someone. It felt very empowering to me.
I bet you could have.
Maybe. There's a very strong female character in this movie. Mm-hmm. And I just remember where I was in my life and the feeling I had. It just felt very empowering and very cool and very just like I wanted to be her really badly. I think I like went out and bought the sunglasses or something. I wasn't detached from reality thinking that I was this person, but I was so entertained. When this came out, as far as visual effects were concerned, it was incredible. It was new. It was different. They used new technology. We had been hearing about it. I was working on a television show at the time that did visual effects, and I supervised and supported those visual effects getting done. So I was very kind of in the know about like what you could get done as far as visual effects and what kind of budget you needed and all of that. And I happened to be on the road with 3 or 4 different people where we had made a short film together, and we were at a film festival that we were brought to for this short film, and we went to see this movie because it was coming out, and it was like, well, we're here for this other thing, but we have to see the Wachowskis' new movie, The Matrix, because we'd been hearing about it in visual effects forever. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, it really hit. I loved it.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I remember seeing it for the first time as well. And when I went back to rewatch it, I still think that the effects, considering this was 1999, I think they still look pretty good.
Still a lot of fun, yeah. And it's dark and brooding, so you can forgive a lot.
But it was they started this whole cinematic, I don't know what you'd want to call it, but eruption of using this type of like slowing down
trend.
Yeah, it's a trend that now we see in a lot of different movies, whether it's an homage or whether they're mocking it or whatever. It became this very sensationalized thing that's now used. And I think even in Kill Bill and stuff, we saw, elements of like, you get to see up close and you slow it down. And it was pretty brilliant, I thought.
Yeah. And it had the whole cyberpunk thing.
Yes.
And it was just hot. It was like hot at the time. This whole like they're in full leather. They're badass. It's this really interesting technological base for the story. And it was just new and interesting and innovative and all of that. And I just remember really enjoying it. And then, you had to go see the next one. You had to go see the next one. And then it fell off and then it came back a few years ago. And of course I had to see that one too. But I say of course, but nothing really lived up to that feeling of going in that. It was just such a time and it was so innovative at that moment. And it was one of those moments where the tipping point happened, right? Like Malcolm Gladwell talks about the tipping point. The tipping point happened and we just shifted as a culture. And it was a very cool cultural happening.
It really was. And I mean, Carrie-Anne Moss had done work before this, but this gave her, she blew up. I mean, people loved her in some ways more than they did Neo.
Yeah, I mean, I love them both. But like I said, as a woman, I just felt so... I could be kick-ass too.
Well, I think this was
That's how it felt.
This was at a time where we only had a few, we had Linda Hamilton coming out of Terminator 2. We had a couple of female characters like that, but it was still before. I think that's also something remarkable to mention about these films is like whether you're talking about Kate Beckinsale and Underworld, you're talking about Carrie-Anne Moss and The Matrix. We started to see this shift in women kind of being badasses in action movies.
Just badass, cold, calculating, taking care of business in these really cool outfits. That's why the leather and what Kathy was talking about with that article. I've seen articles like that, and it's like leather as power. And so you had these dominant, it's in that BDSM culture, right? Like she was a dominatrix in those moments. And it was just so empowering to me to think like, well, I can be that, and I was in a industry that is male dominated and all of that. So it just felt very empowering. And I really enjoyed it for that reason. Do you remember when Blade first took the world by storm?
Oh my gosh. I had so much fun rewatching this movie.
Good.
I love Blade. He's so extra.
And this is a superhero. These are superhero films. Blade trilogy.
Yeah, they are. And we're starting to see a resurgence of Mr. Snipes in this role. But I just I forgot how great he is in this role and how much fun these movies are.
They really are. And again, it's that like goth punk culture. That rave scene at the very beginning of the first Blade is like epic. Like that has always been epic.
Well, and they made him a daywalker, which I think is really cool.
That was new kind of at the time,
it
right?
was new.
Yeah.
We were used to these traditional vampire films that everything was at night and it was dark and whatever. And here this guy is, as a human vampire hybrid, he's not hurt by sunlight. Because he consumes this special serum and then that curbs his bloodlust. But his it was all very, people who knew the comic, it wasn't new to them, but for film buffs, it was like, this was a whole retelling of a vampire story. And he was a good guy.
Yeah, and you liked him and you rooted for him like a superhero, right? Any superhero you want to. He was my favorite kind of superhero, which is very morally gray, like a Batman who's coming from like trauma and is gray morally and has a lot of history and pain and all of that. I'm not much of a Captain America Superman kind of person.
No.
I'm much more of a Batman, Blade kind of a person.
Well, you nailed it, right? I mean, I think there is a deep story, almost like a Shakespearean piece to his story with his mother.
Yes.
That makes him even more redeeming, and then just everything that he has to deal with along that, and the leather all was a way in which he established his status in the world as non-conforming and as a black man, right? So I love Blade. He's a fun one.
Me too. If you have not gone back, if your generation is not a generation who was into any of this, I would say the first Matrix movie is a cultural touchstone to watch. You may find it dated and not like it, and it's not of its time, just like a lot of people who are not of the Crow generation watch The Crow now and find it cheesy and weird and whatever. Blade, I think, is a strong superhero offering, and Wesley Snipes is really great in it. Whatever you think about him now, he's really awesome. And The Matrix, there's just really cool characters, really great action. You're looking at a time in our world when there was blooming technology in the movies, and it's right there on the screen. You could see it's very much a snapshot of where we were technologically speaking, and I think that's really cool as well. I know the other day when I texted you, you were watching the Matrix movie or something, or when we were texting each other.
Yeah.
I think you were watching Underworld.
Oh, yeah.
I think you hadn't watched them in a long time.
Yeah.
What was your thoughts on just like all of a sudden going, oh, I remember this?
I still love this movie so much. I mean, the Lycans have never been done like this before. Can we just for a moment talk about how fucking cool they are in this movie?
They are. The thing I love about Underworld, and there's a couple of movies in this franchise that I actually like, and the rest can suck a dick, but the first Underworld, it's so good. It is so rare to get werewolves that have a budget of any kind. Now, granted, it's an older movie, so the CGI is going to be the CGI of the time, and we know it's improved a lot. But I don't care. There's like a ton of werewolves, and you get werewolf groups, and you get transitions. You get werewolf transitions like by the dozen.
You do, and it's interesting because this is well before Twilight and all this crap came out, is that you realize that the Lycans in this are not necessarily the enemy, right?
That's right.
And this was something that this storyline hadn't been overdone yet.
Right.
And so I love, just like with Blade, there's a deep story around this vampire coven. And Bill Nighy is so great as Luchin.
Oh my God, I love him so much.
He's so great. And the story between him and Celine, who's played by Kate Beckinsale, and how she has this blind loyalty to him, but then finds out what actually happened to her family. I really forgot how deep the story was, because
me too.
When you watch it, or when I went to see it, I was also a lot younger and was watching it for the effects, and the effects still really stand. And the first time Scott Speedman's character transitions, that still looks really fucking good.
It's awesome. It's so fun.
But it's really a lot deeper. And staying on the theme for today's episode, we think about the leather as not only, of course, she looks amazing in it because she's Kate Beckinsale, but it was a pushback against her coven, the traditions of her coven. So if you haven't seen this in a while, this movie is really about lineage. And waking up her lineage in a time of panic. And then she realizes by doing that, a lot of shit hits the fan, and she's like, comes to this realization of who her family really is, and how she lost her biological family. And I don't remember it being that deep.
Yeah, I didn't either, because it probably wasn't at the time.
It probably wasn't.
For me, like you said, I went to it for the leather pants action. Like that's what I was there for, was for this. And there's the gothic love story in the center of it, the Romeo and Juliet crossed lovers that can't be lovers, the forbiddenness of the attraction is actually a through line throughout the whole Underworld franchise. And Yeah, I was happy to see Scott Speedman outside of Felicity with his shirt off. You know what I mean? Like I had different priorities at the time, but it still lands, but also there is a lot of story and a lot of lore and a lot of power, and there's a father-daughter thing there that's really corrupt, and there's the love story that's pretty crazy, and then there's just all these creatures. If you love creatures, I love creatures. I love vampires and werewolves, and you just don't get that. That's what I was struck by when I was rewatching these. It was like, you don't get this kind of many vampires, many werewolves, and a lot of action where they're fighting each other.
No, they had a budget.
Oh yes, they definitely had a budget, and there's 5 movies in this franchise to date, although I saw an article the other day where Kate Beckinsale was like, I could back in the leather pants and do an Underworld movie. And she's 51 now, and that would be kind of cool. Yeah. I don't know if there's even a market for that yet at this point. They'd have to change it, obviously, but it was great. Let me talk a little bit about the whole franchise.
Yeah.
Because I thought I wanted to. I knew I didn't have to for this episode, but I wanted to rewatch the Underworld movies. And I think there was a couple I hadn't even seen before. So I watched all 5.
Wow. I don't think I've seen 4 or 5.
You don't really need to.
Yeah. I loved number 2, though.
2 was solid. I loved number 3, and I remember that it was a betrayal at the time. Like, meaning that I think audiences were very maybe disappointed with Rise of the Lycans, which is the 3rd one. But 1 and 2 are solid. Of course, I liked 1 more than 2. And then if I'm being very honest, I liked 3 more than 2. Now, 3 is Rise of the Lycans, and it's a prequel. And it's Rise of the Lycans. You learn the story of how Lucian became the head of the werewolves. So if you want werewolves, this movie, there's a fuck ton of werewolves.
It's awesome.
It's all werewolves. And the technology had gotten slightly better a couple of years later. So more werewolves, more transitions. It's a prequel, so it's historical. It's a period piece. It's older. The guy who plays Lucian is just badass. He's badass in all the movies, but he's really badass in this movie. Now, I think it might have been they went this direction because they probably lost Scott Speedman as the love interest, because he never shows up in any other movie. Mm-hmm. I imagine they lost him to other movies and he moved on with his life. And Kate Beckinsale isn't in this movie.
That's right.
There's another very powerful, very cool female character in this movie who's Lucian's love interest. And there's a Romeo-Juliet thing there. So they replay kind of we're on opposite sides of the familial world, but we're in love, and that's not going to end well. So it's definitely a tragedy. It's definitely Shakespearean in that way, or Greek tragedy, however you choose to look at it. But there's a lot of werewolves, and you learn that. And there's other characters too that like are Lucian's right-hand man. There's this massive guy that he saves from prison, and da-da-da. And there's all these. It's a lot of action, and it's got a lot of creatures. So I have to say, I don't know how I felt it at the time. I probably felt like it sucked at the time because it didn't have Kate Beckinsale and Scott Speedman in it. And it didn't have any, it had like minimal vampires and it wasn't the same kind of thing. But all these years later, just watching them for like what I like now, I love that movie. And then the last 2 are meaningless garbage that go off the rails. They really try. You can see how and Kate's back in them.
Yeah, I mean, right?
She's in both.
They try to bring it back to life.
So if you like Kate, you're going to want to watch them, but
yeah.
It was a letdown after Rise of the Lycans because I really dug that movie for whatever reason this time around. I really fucking dug it. So there's that.
I mean, I think you nailed it though, which is you and I have talked so much about wanting to see a really good werewolf movie and they don't deliver. There's like a half a werewolf in it. And this you just get like clobbered.
Or they like transition a foot underneath a bathroom stall or something.
Yes,
and you're like, really?
Literally.
I
remember
know
that one?
I know
which one
that was a British movie that we watched. I don't remember the name
We're like,
of it.
Where's the fucking werewolf? We were on Discord and everybody was yelling.
I know.
Everyone was yelling.
We're going to transition a hand and a foot, and that's what you get. You watch a werewolf movie, you want a werewolf transition, right. Even if it's as simple.
I don't want a metaphor.
As one transition.
I don't want a metaphor when I'm watching a werewolf movie.
No,
or really a vampire movie.
I don't. You can have metaphor in it, but you need to give me the transitions, and I need the creatures.
Right.
So I wanted to wrap this up by saying there were actually, I don't know if you know this, but there were actually a lot of Underworld crossovers that they were going to make. And one of them was, of course, a Blade Underworld crossover, which would have been, this article I'm reading is on Collider, and it would have been one of the more ambitious Underworld collabs, obviously. So like Underworld, the Blade franchise had a dark tone. It was action driven, major screen presence of Wesley Snipes, obviously major with Kate Beckinsale. Blade was a vampire. Selena in Underworld, vampire, but it never went anywhere. I think Marvel, right? So Marvel took off. They were going to do all these collabs, and then what happened is Warner Brothers resurrected the MCU and Iron Man, and we're off to those races.
Yeah.
And
no, it's true.
Because Warner Brothers is going to go out of business. Like the MCU literally saved Marvel's, whole thing saved that piece of the industry. So, it got dumped.
And what's funny, just like everything else, history, now we're craving all these old superheroes. They're making a comeback. They're sliding them into some of these other films because we miss them.
Yeah, I mean, Beetlejuice has a movie, The Crow has a movie, like all of these things are coming back. And I get it. Everybody has 80s and 90s nostalgia right now, which is very typical of how we go in these like 50-year cycles. But they were going to do an I, Frankenstein collab. They were going to do a Resident Evil. That would have been really interesting.
Okay.
Of course, the road not traveled, I mean, would have been fascinating, but all of these things obviously just fell apart and never happened. And so we're stuck with what we got. I don't know, there's all this talk about Blade now again. I don't know how real that is.
Well, I think because we're seeing cameos of him again. This talk of, and he looks amazing. I mean,
he does.
You could literally make another, it's like another Indiana Jones. You could do it because Harrison Ford's in excellent shape. You could do another Blade, and he literally, as a vampire, he can't age, but he doesn't really look like he has much, which is why it works to bring Blade back because he hasn't aged.
Sure. And then also, as we know, they just like an Indiana Jones thing or whatever, like they bring back the person and then they make it something new and different. And I know they've had delays in their getting it back on track. But also I know the MCU has had a bit of some bobbles lately, and I know Deadpool has really kind of saved it for a while, right?
Deadpool just really brought Marvel back. They brought Hugh Jackman out of retirement.
I know.
For that movie.
And they're amazing together. So
how do you say no to Ryan Reynolds?
I mean,
you can't.
I wouldn't.
No.
You have to.
He's my straight hall pass.
Oh, wonderful.
I love that man.
He's fantastic. What a good choice.
Yeah, no, that is a dynamic motherfucking duo right there.
Yeah, amazing. Because Hugh Jackman has a wonderful personality, and he's just a good dude. He's a good guy. So I'm loving that, all about that. But anyway, we didn't get any of those crossovers. But now we definitely need the answers to our...
Number 1. In the movie Blade, what is the name that Deacon Frost is trying to decipher?
Bobo Hoboken.
It's the Book of Erebus. Nice try. Number 2.
Thanks.
In the Underworld series, the vampires used blank against the Lycans.
Well, they used a lot of guns, a lot of silver bullets, maybe.
Silver nitrate.
There you
bullets.
go. I don't know. I get a half a point for that. I'm giving myself a half.
You should.
I said silver bullets.
Maybe a third. You got
silver bullets.
You got 2 out of the 3 words right.
Okay.
So 2/3. We'll give you that. The movie Matrix Resurrections began production in San Francisco in February 2020. Under what code name? Project Sweetheart, Project Ice Cream, Project Cable Car, or Project Sweet Tits?
You did not say sweet tits. Ice cream.
Yes. I was seeing if you were paying attention.
Yeah, I'm paying attention.
What is Blade's birth name?
I don't remember the last name, but it's Eric something.
Eric Cross Brooks.
There you go. They call him that a bunch in the movie. Eric.
And then lastly, the unnamed city you see in The Matrix is actually where?
San Francisco.
Sydney, Australia.
Oh, okay.
There it is.
Well, thank you for that. Appreciate you.
You're so welcome.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Terror Talk. My name is Shannon.
And I'm Kathy. Sleep safe, everyone.